Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living. I'm so very, very pleased today to have as my guest John A. Barron. He works with the Alexander Technique. How are you today, John?
I'm pretty good, thanks.
And welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule to sit and talk with me.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks.
So you have your school in Berkeley, and it's all about the Alexander Technique. You live here in San Rafael, and originally you were from Europe.
Mm-hmm. Right. The school in Berkeley is, which is one that I co-direct, is for training teachers in this method of the technique, and it's actually quite an involved teaching. It's a 3-year program that requires 1,600 classroom hours, because this work, it's not just about learning a lot of information, it's really also developing somewhat of an art and a craft in the way that we use our hands in order to affect changes or invite changes in people. And through that, we're also teaching them how they're able to work on themselves, to make changes that will need to be made to deal with whatever situation they're looking for, whatever thing they want to change or make changes in. And people come for many, many different reasons. Yeah.
Well, let's get some background on the Alexander Technique.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, like Alexander, the man who created this method, you were an actor and he was an actor also.
Right.
And he was seeing the limitations in the way of using his body to be the best of the actor that he could be. So he developed this whole methodology of how to have awareness, bring it into the body of awareness, how we basically use our body on the micro moments, from moment to moment, of having consciousness put in there, instead of just doing things randomly. And you were an actor in England, you were on stage and television, and also you had concerns about your body, of what happened. I think you had some type of concerns in your back.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us about Alexander.
Okay. Well, Alexander, he was a real interesting character. And he was from around the mid-1850s. And he was born in Tasmania, a very kind of remote place on a big farm. And his passion was for theater. And he was a very successful actor. And in that time, they had these one-man shows where people would do these great recitals, and so they'd perform from Dickens and Shakespeare and perhaps some of their own poems, etc. So it was a whole evening, and lots of people would come around to from the different places that he traveled to, and was very successful. But what started to happen to him was that in the middle of a show, he'd start to lose his voice. And I tell you, that's a real difficult situation for an actor, especially if they're just doing a one-man show and they're trying to, get through it. And there they are, I got no voice. So the poor guy, he went to all the medical guys, and they gave him various things for his throat, etc., and told him to rest, and he would be fine. If he rested for about a couple of days, he'd go back, he'd have his voice back, but then halfway through the show, the same thing would happen. So that actually destroyed his career. And he came to realize that it was something that he was doing to himself that was causing that particular symptom.
And that something, was that on a physical or a psychosomatic level, mental level, or a combination of all of this?
Well, I think at that time he may have looked at it just as a physical condition that was happening, but through his own private research, and he spent many, many years exploring this idea of how he was using his body in the art of speaking. And then through that discovery, through that research that he was doing, he came to the understanding that there was there was no indivisibility between mind and body, but he didn't come to that just as an idea, but he went on to really develop a means for explaining that experientially. And that became part of this work called the Alexander technique. Now we also have to remember, you know, it was developed by him over many, many years. There are different levels to it. But basically where we can start to look at it from is from the perspective of how we use ourselves, how we use our bodies, how we use our minds, rather like Alexander when he was using his voice. What's involved in using a voice for an actor in a theater?
Well, let's look at that and let's imagine what he was actually doing, Alexandra, when he was actually developing this. I imagine for a number of years, he basically was maybe perhaps in front of a mirror.
Good one.
And he was speaking, and then he saw the way that he would be using his hands or the way he would take a gesture or movement. Then he saw the correlation between his voice and the somatic, we call it, the word today is somatic, the energy that is facilitating all the senses to come together.
Good one, yeah.
And so I imagine that in his think tank laboratory that he was doing, and he was doing this all by himself.
All by himself.
Isn't this absolutely amazing?
He was very intuitive and very innovative, yeah.
And so over the years, he was doing this. So what would you add to that of what he possibly was doing there?
Well, I think in front of the mirrors, like you said, he was working in front of the mirrors for several years, actually. And what he started to look at was the way he was speaking. And he noticed, of course, that when he was speaking, that the thought to speak would have him tighten the head back, and then which would automatically tighten his larynx, because whenever you tighten the large neck muscles, you are automatically constricting the larynx. So now he's noticing in his speaking that that's starting to happen, that's a disconnect, or what we later started to call misuse. So starting to observe these patterns of misuse, and in his case it was for speaking, but there are many, many other different cases. People with back pain, for instance, can start to see how the tensions that they've accidentally acquired can contribute to them bringing so much unnecessary tension to their lives that feel normal to them. And therefore, they'll start to observe their own individual and unique patterns so that they can start to understand what not to do. And I think this is why this is very, very different in a way, that we're not looking at what to do right, because that in itself will just put more tensions on us. So, but recognizing how we're putting ourselves wrong, and then through this process we're learning how to deal with it.
And then he wrote a book called Use of Self. That
was his third book.
That was his third book?
Yes.
And his other two books?
There are other 3 books, yes, that he wrote.
And the names of the other books?
Man's Supreme. They're very kind of Victorian titles, you know. They're very kind of, some people find them a little verbose, but I think they're great titles. One is The Universal Constant in Living, and then there's The Constructive Conscious Control of the Individual, and then Man's Supreme Inheritance. Today, you see, he was an actor, so.
Wonderful.
We get the razzmatazz in the titles.
Yes, and my understanding of the Alexander technique is, as I'm listening to you describing it, is that it's not about having a fixed point of view of mind that's telling the body how to use your body. It's about letting go.
Right.
And when you say experiential, it's about an ease and a flow and a naturalness that you tap into. It's kind of like, I imagine the way children use their bodies.
Exactly. Yeah, we look at children, and it's wonderful to look at kids. And like if you see kids, like in a kindergarten room, you know, you'll see them moving around so effortlessly, or so connected, so balanced, so coordinated. And when they pick something up, they just go down into this little squat and then just float back up. And we actually can see that in other, like third world countries, some third world countries, where you'll see the old people, and they'll squat down on their heels and they'll start, chatting to each other as they, and then, just move, and they've got all these wrinkles around, etc. But they've still got this effortless and connection, and we kind of lose that connection. We can come up with many different reasons for it, adapting to the pace of our culture or the pressures in our culture. But I think that word adapting is very important, and how we're all adapting to our own worlds is really an art, and it can be facilitated by this work.
I think the enemy of this work could be practice manners. People getting into a certain way that they sit all the time. They cross their legs, which torques out their spine, and they're not knowing it. Or they lean forward, or they have certain hand gestures, and they are so used to sitting that way, and they do that, they snap into it in an unconscious way.
Yes.
And that's not serving them whatsoever, but they're totally unaware of it.
Yes.
That's actually not facilitating the body to be in that natural state that we're talking about.
Actually, that's a big part of this work, is that coming to terms with our kinesthetic awareness, and because the habits that we've acquired, our habits of movement, our habits of expression, they feel right. So, for instance, if I give an obvious example, if someone has a tendency to just hold themselves, let's say, over to the right, and that becomes a fixed pattern, and it starts to feel okay and normal. Therefore,
that feels natural to them.
To them.
Even though it's not.
Yes.
Their whole alignment is completely thrown out.
Yes.
But it feels right
it
to them in their
right.
mind.
So then we start to kind of fixate into these patterns, into these sets. So then when we start to recognize that, or for instance, if you take someone like that and you just play with them and kind of put them into a more balanced position, they'll oftentimes say, well, I'm falling to my left. Because the sensory awareness is distorted. So a part of this work is explaining that to people, and then taking them through various procedures, etc., or applying the principles of this work, so they start to realize that their sensory feedback, that their ideas of what's right might not be right.
And then once they have that awareness, it's like learning an instrument, like a piano. You learn the technique, but then you forget about the technique to be really, really good at it.
Good.
So you cannot be focusing on the technique and awareness of, I have to do this, I have to do that, I shouldn't be sitting to the side. You bring the awareness into it, and then you forget about it, and then allow the innate energy of the body to take over and do it.
I think you're touching on a lot of things here, and it is coming to, to understand that these learned patterns, can be undone, and then starting to find out what's there, rather than just reacting all the time from a fixed position, a fixed point. So,
I would think that corporations would benefit their workers. And I understand that you were at Google for a number of years, and you were their lead. They had a department there that was for manpower to help them for massage or stress reduction and how would you say it, working out. But they brought you in, and you were working with them, and I saw some of the video clips of that, and I thought it was wonderful, wonderful work. That there they are, and they're sitting at the computer all day long, in that mode of in an incorrect position for so long, constantly, and their shoulders are all hunched over. And then you worked with them on a one-to-one. What was that experience like?
Oh, that was a lot of fun. I was very creative. Because also when I'm doing work in corporations, I've worked for some others too, it's not the kind of environment that just lends itself very easily to the traditional way of working with someone one-on-one. So what we start with, I have developed a training program for this where we have like a 3-hour introductory workshop where we start to explore some of these principles and ideas and also make it lighthearted, and it's a fun thing to do. And then we'll start to work more one-on-one with people, because you have to. Everybody is just so different. You know, you can't really do, you know, psychotherapy in some ways, you know, in groups all the time. You know, at some point you work one-on-one with people because of their individuality. It's the same with our patterns of what we've called use so far. You know, this, again, the way that we move, the way that we express ourselves. So, you know, you go into a corporation like Google, which is it's a fun place. There's so much stuff going on there and so many programs for their employees. But you walk around and you start to observe people at their workstation. Now, a lot of the people there are fairly young and very bright, but they also would work, let's say, just 8 hours a day in front of a computer. And it's an athletic demand to work in front of a computer. We're not meant to sit down, and from my point of view, we're not really meant to, you know, work 8 hours a day doing this. There is no right position, because if you give people a model of what the right position is, you then have to look at how they interpret that. And so you have a picture of, say, like, you know, the ergonomic lady who's sat up very nicely with a stiff back, etc. And there's a mechanically advantageous position to that. Doing this, you know, with the hands below the elbows, etc., shoulders a little released, and the right height of the chair. All that's important, but the missing link seems to be is how people take that information and how they use that in order to be able to connect themselves in that particular situation. So if they just have the picture to go from, or the idea of holding themselves up straight, or what they were told as kids, you know, sit up straight, oftentimes they'll do it by stiffening the spine, and that will probably only last about 30 seconds, and then they'll be back to their, you know, to their old forms. So it really requires a new way of thinking to be able to deal with this situation. And yes, the health programs that Google offered are great, you know, their exercise programs, etc. But from my point of view, there's still a missing link. We still need to consider how an individual's use is, how they adapt themselves to these different situations.
Well, John, let's explore that a little bit
Good.
further. The individual is sitting there at the computer. Okay. They're going to tense up because they're going to become aware that they're sitting incorrectly. So in that tensing up, they're doing exactly the opposite of what they should be not doing. And so ideally, they would want to have a feeling, a sense of their alignment, that they are aligned properly, that their spine is all stacked up right, their shoulders, everything is balanced. And then I would think the emphasis would be on the ease of it. Let it go. Just completely let it go and feel what that feels like to have the spaciousness to that. The openness, the body is talking to you and saying, this feels really, really good. And allow that to happen. You see, then what we have there is that, you know, if you, because I've done this with lots of people in groups, you know, if you ask someone to, not to explain, you know, not to just, you know, conceptualize what balance and release is, but to show what it's like to be relaxed, say. And you ask someone to be at ease, but show me physically. Now, a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people will actually start to go to the opposite of over-tension, which is over-collapse. Slumping. A slumping. So then, you see, and then you have a mixture of over-tension, over-collapse. So, you know, we can't really go back to, you know, what does it feel like, given that
as we said before, you know, the sensory awareness has been compromised through not just our adapting to our day-to-day events, etc., or to the pressures in our life, but also to what Alexander called end gaining. And this is a very, very important thing for us to consider, that all these like goals that we set for ourselves, the idea of trying to do something right, to accomplish something where we only focus on its accomplishment and not on the means that are used in order to accomplish that. That's something that we want to kind of explore and play with in this work. So we want to start to consider what are the correct means for me to say finish this project. If we go back to the Google idea, you know, where you're down there, people have got certain deadlines to meet. Now that thought in itself, I've got to meet this deadline, it's not just the physical reaction, it's the whole, you know, being that reacts to that. So
and stress is going to be
stress, right.
Yes, yes.
So we look at the idea of stress being a stimulus, but the way that we all individually strain and hold ourselves is, of course, the way we're responding, the learned responses, which become habitual, again, which feel right. We kind of get locked into these very kind of limited patterns. But then, the other part to this too is that use, the way that we do use ourselves, affects our functioning for good or for ill. And so a lot of us actually think that misuse is at the root cause of a lot of unnecessary injury. So if, for instance, we go back to the, you know, what you were saying before about the computer and the, you know, the tightness in the head and the neck, the collapses, the overtensions, the pressures, and then the pressures of the deadlines, etc., or having to do something, moving from one project to another, we have to look at, okay, how is an individual, how are we dealing with that situation? And if we have a reasonable level of use, yes, we may be able to tolerate it. If we don't, then we might be putting so much pressure on ourselves that it actually becomes unhealthy.
So it starts in acute and then can go into chronic.
Exactly.
And it sounds like if you're all hunched over,
Yes.
then the alignment over a period of years is going to get so bad. And people are saying, I'm having back pain. But really, is that the correct thing to say?
Good one. You see,
I am not having back pain.
Uh-huh.
You have to, instead it would be, what is happening at that moment? What am I feeling at that moment? How am I contributing to that?
Yes.
How can I relax
Yes.
into that?
What am I doing to myself?
Yes.
How am I tightening my back rather than my back hurts? So if I'm tightening my back stiffly, it's going to hurt.
Right. So
Yeah.
again, it's bringing the consciousness into it, bringing the awareness into it.
Yes, on a moment-to-moment basis, because in some ways
Yes.
that's the kinesthetic sense, which actually has been referred to as the lost sixth sense. That sense of ourselves in space, in movement, you know, the sense, somewhat of the sense of ourself, that, you know, the awareness of tension even. Because if we become very, very tight, so like we're very tight in the neck and not realizing it, then, you know, the musculature there gets very, very over tight, and with over tension we lose awareness, we lose proprioception. You know, a lot of those proprioceptor things in the neck, you know, when they're tight, the functioning's not operative, yeah.
So in the sixth sense, there would be
an awareness of it.
awareness, and
Yeah.
that's where the alpha level is, the all-knowing level. It's called the effective sensitory perception. They say it's ESP, but I would say that it's effective sensitory perception.
Okay.
And this was coined after Silva Mind Control, Jose Silva. And they marveled at all of his work that he was doing for decades. And that effective sensitory perception is when everything comes into alignment and there's an ease and there's a flow. It's where, I suppose, the animals, they have this instinct.
Yes.
They're highly, highly acute into awareness of this instinct where they can see what's
see
ahead of
It's
them.
very tactile when it's around danger and you see that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And they know what's ahead of the curb, like down the road, miles ahead of them. They just know there's this, they walk with this awareness. Where we in the city here and in society, we're being bombarded by all kinds of noise and stimuli.
Yes.
And the worst, as I pointed out in the very beginning, is this practice manners. We are closed into our own bubbles of reality. And in that, that has got to be the most damaging factor of all, because then we're seeing ourselves as something solid, and we're not. We're completely fluid energy.
Right. Yeah. And it can be fun to kind of let go of the old solids, you know. Yeah. And to see what else is there, so that we don't have to end up in these fixed patterns, and because most people are not very happy in them anyhow.
So let's talk about when you were an actor in England, and you were in television and stage, and you knew about the Alexander work at that time, and how did it contribute to you being an actor, and how did you see the benefits, and as opposed to before you were not knowing of the Alexander technique?
Well, I knew the technique on a certain level at that time, because I was quite, I started out with the technique when I was about 22 or so, and I went for a whole series of lessons. So I had a certain amount of awareness of the work, and was able to start to apply it to my work as an actor to a certain degree. I'd say a lot of actors use this work now, and it's part of the drama school curriculums and a lot of the music colleges too, because it helps us deal moment to moment, you know, with certain things like, you know, performance anxiety, and with release of our holding tensions, with really kind of being able to, you know, play the instrument, which an actor has to do, and to adapt to all these different roles and different characters that the actors play.
I imagine that breath plays a large part in this. And what kind of breathing are we speaking about?
Well, Alexander used to be known as the breathing man in the early days, because he focused so much on breath, and possibly from his own background too, and his own interests in that. With breathing, what we're looking at is, okay, what learned habits has a person developed that's interfering with the free functioning of breathing, of the ease. So if people come a little tight and tense, etc., or collapsed, whatever, all that affects breathing. Any collapse in the torso, any downward pressure or any upward push, etc., all interferes with the breathing function. Any tightness in the jaw, in the neck, in the holding in the larynx, etc., all that interferes with breathing.
How about crossing the arms, crossing the legs?
All that is closing.
Yes, all of it.
Closing down. So even tightening the toes will interfere with breathing because of all the connections. You know. So then we start to see what's going on there as teachers, and then we start to work with undoing their particular habit of misuse within, so that we're able to encourage and that ease in the breath, so that it will function as it does by itself, and we don't, you know, we don't have to be conscious about breathing. If we did, we probably wouldn't be here. But yeah. So, and it's many different ways that a person holds themselves together. It's really fascinating to look at it through this whole lens of use from this Alexander perspective, and then working with the undoing those layers, letting go. Yeah.
So this is all happening. You were on stage or on television, and you're working with the other actors, and you're doing all this work. It's not, nobody could see you're doing it, because what they're actually seeing, and the translation of that would be that you were just an instrument, a vehicle of very ease and relaxed. and it was coming through you. All the energy was coming through you. Your dialogue was coming through. Your gestures were there was a flow to it. There was a natural, symbiotic rhythm to all.
On a good night.
On a good night. And on the other nights,
you dealt with it as best you could.
But so you had the awareness that
you're
knew
aware. You're aware of being tight.
I'm sorry.
You're aware of being tight. If you're performing, and you're aware of the holdings, you're aware of them coming, and I think that's good. It's great for me to be aware of being disconnected. Like when I get myself disconnected and I'm tightening in different places, that's great. You know, I want to know that, and I try not to make big decisions, you know, when I'm disconnected. So it's kind of like a little, use is a little bit like a barometer, you know, of the self in a way. You can start to see how we actually are. I mean, but how we are, you know, not just how you're feeling, but, you know, where am I holding, etc., how released. Yeah.
So what would you do with that at that moment when you feel that you're holding? Would you bring your awareness to your breath? Would you bring your openness to it and just allow yourself to be more relaxed? Or a combination of that or more? What would you actually be doing?
There's not one answer, you know, it depends on so many, you know, so many factors. But just working with undoing, letting go, or also, you know, recognizing what's triggering it. Okay, what am I trying to do? You know, because oftentimes when things don't go quite so well, say like in a performance for a musician or an actor, oftentimes the musician or the actor starts to drive it and try to make the goal happen. And that will oftentimes just result in them tying themselves up in knots. So at that point, okay, they're seeing that they're trying to do too much, they're trying to try. And then just, okay, what we call in this work inhibiting. We start to inhibit the thoughts that trigger the strain. So then, you know, we just say, okay, lose that one, let go. And then we can start to let go of the way that we're holding ourselves together, undoing certain areas, etc.
Wonderful. What would a typical session look like? Or is there such a thing as a typical session? Probably not. It's probably each session is very new and very much in the experience of that person. So as a new person comes to you, what would that session look like? The first session?
There's a structure, obviously, you know. So if someone's coming to me for the first time, I will see them for an hour. Other colleagues don't, you know, spend a little less time, others the same time, etc. But I like to, you know, just to chat for a few minutes first with the person, get a sense of what they want, and then start to see how this work may be able to help them. It might not, but may be able to help them, and what we can start to work with. Now, then we'll invariably look at this whole idea of the use, and from use we also start to see where the misuse, the learned misuse patterns are, and we start working together to explore them and to undo them. And we'll work at it. I'll ask people to go through very simple movements, or even if they're a musician, they might bring their instrument, and I can start to see how their general movements and the specific movements they have when they're playing their instrument are interrelated, and point that out, and then we can start to work. But then we come to this idea of really not trying to impose or do something, you know, not identifying a problem and giving a solution straight away, but working through that process of undoing. So that's why it takes such a long time to become a teacher of this method. You learn these, as I said before, the kinesthetic skills. So you have to work hands-on, and with the hands-on, you're able to point out to people kinesthetically through touch where they're holding, and then effect a release, and not only a release, but a connection. So there is such a thing as, you know, the body's innate wisdom. However, it's not readily available. And we have to work through the layers of learned stupidity to find it.
Hmm. I had the privilege to have a session with you, and I was laying on the table, and you had 4 hardcover books that you had put underneath my neck. I found that
underneath your head. Yes.
Underneath my the back of my neck, underneath my head. It was very interesting. It was a very interesting feeling, and it showed me and felt how the alignment of my body was in the correct position at that time.
You see, that is also what was Alexander's big discovery, that there exists a natural connection or an innate connection, which is basically the whole area of the spine, the head, the neck, and the back. When we don't mess with that, that works as an integrating force. So when we become aware of this head, neck, and back connection, then it helps us to integrate our movements. But also that awareness helps us to use appropriate force within an activity, appropriate balance, a freedom of movement. And we can find that because those are innate qualities, like the kids we talked about earlier, the kindergarten kids have beautiful fluid movement, or the people in third world countries again. Those, I myself do see that there is this innate connection, and we can find that through this work and be helped, with by studying the technique. But the whole art of this work is that it's educational. It teaches so that the person then becomes their own teacher. They carry on themselves. They learn the principles, and they learn to undo these patterns. They find these connections, and then they go off and they do their own work, and they learn to apply it to serve them, in their lives.
And then they can come back just for maintenance.
They can come back, yeah.
Yes.
Now and again, yes.
Would you share some of the incredible success stories that you've had with numerous clients that you've worked with?
Well, there's, I think, one good success story actually, which is bigger than my experience, is the research that was done by in London, in Southampton actually, sorry, that was published in the British Medical Journal, and it was a very involved study on the effectiveness of the Alexander technique for back pain patients. And it actually showed that that people the people in the group in the study were able to diminish their experiences of back pain by 85%, and that that the effects lasted over time. And
that's without medication, just totally.
This is through education.
Fabulous.
So there we go to education is oftentimes the best cure.
Prevention and education.
Yeah. But there is an art and a craft and a skill to this work in teaching it. And so that when you get good teachers, I think they can have, there are many, many success stories through this work. But the other ingredient is that you have to have a person who's wants and who is really willing to work and not just receive sessions and treatment, but really takes the principles and creatively applies the principles and goes through the procedures too, to their life. So then, when they're out of the studio and they're back down working at Google, they're in front of a computer screen and they notice these old misuse patterns creeping back, they're able to, okay, what's triggering this? Okay, I was pushing myself, I was wanting to get something done, let's let go. And the undoing, okay, and then just focusing on what's the correct means for this particular goal, and applying those. And they oftentimes find that it's far more effective that way, to be that way, rather than pushing themselves and getting locked in old momentums of misuse.
So it's a good idea to be able to stop every 5 minutes or so, and to check in with yourself. Scan your body from your soles of your feet to the top of your head, and see exactly where the tension is, see where the holding is. Allow your body to talk to you. Allow it to communicate in what it needs.
And also it's so effective to, to go through that. I think it's fine. And it can be effective just for 1 second. Because if you're locked up into some driven momentum, and there's an old embodiment of it that's tight and putting you, perpetuating that kind of driven tension, whether it's embodied, just stop and letting go, and then continuing. So we learn to work with this, because, and we call that inhibition in the technique, because in our culture there is so much excitation. We're so driven. You see the kids in the arcade, you see the kids, playing the games, etc., and you just see this slightly distorted, if somewhat neurotic response in a lot of them, where they're just so driven, overexcited. And you see that in, other people too. What helps is that we start to deal with that and start to make choices, so that we're not just firing on all these, on all these cylinders, that we actually start to bring in this natural quality of inhibition to our activities, so that we start to make choices on how we want to be. And so that this process of inhibition is not like it's a good idea, like cod liver oil or something, It's something that really is fundamental. It's natural in the animal kingdom. You'll see a cat and a mouse, and a cat doesn't just immediately just go for the mouse, because it probably wouldn't get it. It waits. It creeps forwards, and then at the right moment it pounces. So we can say that was a good balance between appropriate excitation and inhibition. But we've kind of lost that quality of stopping, because I do feel that we're, for the most part, overdriven, overexcited, and overstimulated. And then, if that's the case, then it behooves us to make choices on how we want to be, and what we take in and what we don't take in. So, if you've got some awkward person saying, do this, do that, whatever, you can, okay, stop, do I want it? No, okay. Or, yes. But to make the choice about how we respond, rather than just firing from the old framework, from the old postural sets, or that sense of self,
I have an incredible sense that this work is so important for everyone to experience. It will free up the mind and open up the mind and open up the emotions. There will be more emotional intelligence going on. The coordination between the body and the mind, it's phenomenal. And when your body is so tight and constricted, how much are we really using of our potential?
Yes. And how does that affect our mind?
And how does that affect our society and our world and everything?
Yeah.
So I think it's amazing. It's amazing to sit here and speak with you and feel all the possibilities of what could be for everyone.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting work. And it's amazing for me, because I look back over all the years I've done this. I've been doing this now like for full-time for 25 years, and I never meant to become an Alexander teacher, and it was never my idea. But what happened was that, yes, I was very interested when I was in theatre at that time, and then later on I studied it for a long time with a couple of people, and then, yes, I made a decision to join a training course and to check it out even further. But when I joined the training course, I actually thought I'd made a big mistake. I thought, you know, I'm not very good at, you know, repairing cars and things. I'm not very good with my hands. I'm not good at drawing pictures. So I didn't know whether I would be able to have that skill that you do need to be able to work with people hands-on. So I had all these, in myself, all these oppositional thoughts about becoming a teacher, or even doing what I was doing, which was being in training for a teacher at that time. But what happened was that the work itself, by just, you know, exploring it and applying it, it kind of took over and made my mind up for me, because I had certain experiences which were able to give me a very, you know, positive connection to what I was doing.
What were those experiences?
The experiences of connection, experiences of what happens when
connection to self.
Yeah.
It was more profound. There was more subtleness. Please elaborate on that.
Yeah, less crap.
Less what?
You know, just let you know, less holding, less tightness. You know, if one's been held together in a particular way, for whatever reasons, defensive or otherwise, etc., it's a very limited place to hang out. And when you actually start to release the choreography of it, then it opens you up to an experience of what's life like without all that stuff.
Was it a feeling of spaciousness that you were experiencing?
Yeah.
Instead of just letting go
rather than narrowness, more openness.
More openness.
Yeah. And more fluidity, more ease with others, you know, with myself too.
And that translates into your nervous system and the way you're being with yourself. There was just a complete moment of just letting go. It feels so good.
Yeah. It's nice to let go of stuff that you don't need anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Throughout the years, have you had any injuries, or have you seen other people with injuries that this work has helped?
Oh yes. Actually, a lot of people have come to me because of pain, and you know, and oftentimes they come because they've tried so many other things, and which haven't worked out for them. So we can start to see if the way that the pressures that what they're doing to themselves, the pressures they're putting on themselves, are actually at the root cause of a lot of unnecessary pains and injury. So therefore, a lot of people who've come with, I mean, I've had people come in the studio on their hands and knees because their back was just, they couldn't stand. Or people come and who weren't able to speak and hadn't been able to speak for several months because of the tightness that they were putting on themselves. And then when you work to release certain areas, and you show them how with the hands those pressures are undone, and you know, functioning can happen. So speaking can happen, or there can be a lessening of discomfort, or an eradication of it in cases too. So I think it has enormous therapeutic benefits. Well, that's honestly why I started myself, because I had back pain when I was 22 years old, and I'm 6'1", and I was just worried that, you know, that my lower back pain would, when I was much older, be so difficult because it hurt, you know. And then when I went along to my sessions, I came to realize that yes, I had back pain. Why? Because when I was standing, my habits were such that my pelvis was way forwards, and I'd locked into that, and therefore my lumbar spine was very rigid and tight. So that was worked with, and we worked to undo that. And when you undo those things, it can oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, clear up what you thought was the problem.
So unlike a chiropractor who actually does an adjustment, the Alexandria technique does not do the adjustments. It basically brings the awareness in, like as you said, your pelvic was thrown out. So you bring the awareness into gently moving the pelvic back into alignment in its correct natural position.
Yes, because if you think of it, why is the pelvis being held forwards? Well, because there's a holding in certain areas, you know, holding the hip area, lower back, glutes, etc. But that tension, in order to support the habit of stance, is unnecessary. It's over tight. So when you let go of there, posture happens. It's the easiest thing. That's why you don't have to do posture. If you have the right connection, posture does itself, like it does in kids. So any kind of idea that this is to do with postural training is I feel it's a misrepresentation.
Has the Alexander technique been improved on now that we have, or can it be improved on? Back in Alexander's days, he did not have computers. The understanding of maybe energetic medicine was just happening in the 1920s with the two German gentlemen for homeopathy, Edward Bach for flower essence in England, Wilhelm Reich. There was so much going on of the energetic medicine.
Yes.
He was a little bit before that, Alexander.
Yes, he was.
And then he passed on what year?
He's 1955.
So now with the advent of the knowledge and the computers and energetic medicine is firmly coming back into play now. Do you see that it could be improved on or enhanced?
I think it can be both. I think, you know, when I think back to some of the older teachers I worked with, you know, who trained with Alexander, the skills and the craft that they developed over many, many years was phenomenal. And that's not going to be reproduced by any gizmos or computers or anything like that. So, yeah, and then also, you know, there's an opportunity of, because this work has been around for such a long time, you know, well over 100 years, there is an opportunity of it really being taken to a much wider audience. And I think that's what, you know, the technology can do. But what I do like to say to people, that there are no shortcuts. You know, it's like there's no free lunch. One really has to go through the, you know, the process itself to actually find the connections, to find benefit for oneself. One's got to give it, you know, a little time to be able to see how this can really adapt to an individual's life. And of course, that's the, you know, that's the art of the teaching. That, you know, someone comes in and we don't just kind of say, okay, you go through number 1, 2, 3 and these steps, etc. It's, you know, really adapting what you know to the person's needs, finding out what they need, and seeing how these creative principles that in the technique can be so life-enhancing and so helpful and very, very practical.
How many sessions would you think that different people would need minimum? Could it be 10 sessions or 5 sessions to start with? And
I'd like to get away from that discussion, because then we set it up as, like, you know, an end game, as this is the number an individual needs, and we're all so different.
Wonderful.
But what I do say to people is, you understand what you're getting, the benefits, as you go through the sessions. So if you've done one session, you'll have an experience of the work, and from that you will be able to see how or how not this work might be able to help you. After 3 or 4 sessions, you understand more, and you can understand where you want to go with it. After 5 or 6 sessions, like that. Now, it has to work for people both, you know, from their own financial needs as well as their own time needs too. So that's only fair that that's factored into it. So you can see some people and you can say, okay, if we went through one session, this would be really helpful. It wouldn't be a completed experience, of course, yes, but it would be helpful. But if they had like 10 sessions, from what they've told me and what I can see, if they had that number of sessions, that would really give them a lot of practical experience where they could carry on by themselves. or it may be more, because some people come in and do need a lot of attention, and especially if they're coming because they're in a lot of pain.
Well, John, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to speak with you. And what final thoughts do you have that you would like to share with the ordinary person who would like to know more about your work and how it would benefit them?
I think experience, to not to spend too much time, getting more data and information about this work, but to try and find someone you can work with, so that you can have an experience of this work, so that you can experience what it's like to to undo some of your holding tensions, or to have some of this hands-on work from the technique, to see what all that's about, but really to content yourself more with an experience of it. So,
well, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, really, of deciding to do this work.
Well, you know what? I love it.
Yes.
I've been doing it for 25 years, as I said, and I actually sincerely enjoy it more and more than I did in the early years. So, yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you, John.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks.
And thank you from the Art of Conscious Living, and take care of yourself.